Nate, you're actually so welcome back to the Happier Work podcast. We had a discussion, I want to say it's probably about 2 years ago now at this stage, a really fascinating discussion about your previous book. And I know today we're going to talk about your next book that is coming out in July of this year. Do you want to introduce people, for those who haven't listened to that previous episode, you want to let people know a little bit about your background and what you've been up to?
Aoife, thank you for having me back. It's great. Yeah, I'm Nate Regier. I'm the CEO and founding owner of Next Element Consulting. And we were founded in 2008. And we're a global leadership consulting and culture development firm. We specialize in helping people and their organizations build cultures of compassionate accountability. And so we have been developing tools and assessments and methodologies for helping bring more compassion to the workplace for about 15 years now. And we have a team here in the US. We also support a global network of about 120 coaches, consultants, and trainers that are using these tools and assessments to try to make a difference in the world.
Wow, that's incredible. And I'd love to just pick up on this concept of compassion. Like, do you want to sort of define that? What do you really mean by compassion?
Well, compassion is a big word and it's popular now. It's trending. Everyone's talking about
Yeah.
it. I don't think most people really understand what it is though. And we've been exploring and researching and applying compassion for 15 years at Next Element. And we go back to the root of the word, which comes from the Latin origin meaning to suffer with. With suffer is what compassion means. And that's a really unique definition that is so helpful for leaders. Yeah. Because how often do leaders, if you think about compassion means to struggle with, let's call it that. Life is hard. It's struggle. We're struggling every day. Think about the other ways we could struggle. We could struggle against. Most
Mhm.
drama and most conflict happens because we struggle against each other and turn everything into win-lose situations. We could struggle instead of, meaning, here, let me take it over for you. And as leaders, there's nothing that undermines capability more than rescuing people and struggling instead of them. And it also burdens the leader, and then they're burned out. And a third way that we can struggle in an unhelpful way is to struggle alone. And how many people are struggling in silence, struggling alone, feel ashamed to ask for help or to share that they're struggling because for whatever reason. So struggling alone, struggling instead of, and struggling against none of them end well, but
Mm.
struggling with is what true compassion really is. And we think that this kind of an understanding leads us to better definitions, better practices in the workplace.
Love that. And picking up then on this second word that you use is accountability. And any thoughts, I'd love to get your honest thoughts on how companies are utilizing this or how they're
Yeah.
implementing accountability in
Yeah.
in your view.
Well, we see two things happening.
Mm.
We either see compassion without accountability, which gets you nowhere.
Okay.
You can't just solve everything with kindness. And we saw this coming out of COVID. When COVID hit, everybody was kind of shocked. We're in this together. Everybody's afraid. Everybody's struggling. So we kind of just say anything goes. Work from home, do whatever. We're just going to make sure everybody's fine and safe. And that's great. And then all of a sudden so after a while, people said, well, wait, we still have to get work done.
Yeah.
And so then the pendulum swung to the other side, which is accountability without compassion. And that gets you alienated. So when companies say everybody has to come back to work, or you cannot do this, or we're going to start, you have to fill out time cards even when you're at your house. This goes back to creates toxic environments. And so the reality is compassion without accountability gets you nowhere, but accountability without compassion gets you alienated.
Mm.
So the real solution is and the big idea of my book is that compassion and accountability are actually not in tension. They're not opposites. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah. I love that. And certainly having been in that situation, the accountability without compassion, holding people to account. But I think if we come back just looking at accountability in general, not taking consideration of compassion for now, what I find in a lot of organizations is that there's just no accountability whatsoever. And maybe
Right,
there's no compassion either. And again, that's
right,
probably a toxic environment. But just
right.
that we're here to get a job done. but people aren't necessarily held to account for getting that job done.
Right. Right. Yeah, and we do everyone a disservice when we don't talk about what's expected and we don't ask people to step up and when we don't hold standards. Because the truth is, when you look at all of the engagement research, all of the emerging research on what newer generations want, is they want to know what's expected. They want to succeed. They want to achieve, and they want to be stretched. And they want a leader or a boss who's going to coach them, talk to them about their performance, invest in them to become better, and be crystal clear and truthful about what's expected. And they want real honest feedback in with dignity, of course. So, avoiding those conversations, not talking about it is not compassionate because we're not struggling. We're leaving people to struggle by themselves, and we're not really talking about what it means to be responsible in relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that springs to mind, and it comes back to your the kind of different areas around suffering or struggling, and that's struggling instead of. So that's kind of maybe, like you said, coming to the rescue. That if work is not getting done, that you're jumping in and you're doing it yourself. As a leader, you've asked someone to do something and hasn't been done or hasn't been done to the standard or the quality that you would like, even though you
Yeah,
haven't necessarily communicated that, but then you're
yeah,
jumping in to rescue and you're kind of taking it over
right,
from someone else. Or you're just kind of leaving them to their own devices, not communicating
right.
and letting them
Yeah,
kind of get
yeah.
on with things themselves. There's so many different things happening in organizations these
Mhm.
days. And I have certainly been in that situation where, you know, you're not really sure of what is expected. I think it's so important to set really clear expectations, to set priorities. And when I talk about expectations, it's about expectations around around how long should this take me to do. So if I'm thinking in my head 4 hours, when in fact the boss has in mind 2 hours, or they have in mind 8 hours, that might give me a sense of what the kind of quality that's expected, but that should be communicated as well. Like this is VIP, this is a really important client that we're doing this work for, and the quality needs to be to this standard, and then share an example of what that might look
Yeah,
like. Mm.
absolutely. If we're not talking about what's most important and talking about what we are imagining the standard to be or what we're visualizing that, it's not fair to our employees because then how can we have accountability conversations later if we haven't talked
Exactly.
about that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's setting the scene. So in terms of the book, do you want to talk us through like the kind of the main premise of
Mhm,
the book
mhm.
and the structure, how it's laid out?
Yeah. So the main premise I mentioned already is that compassion and accountability are actually one.
Mm.
And viewing them as intention or viewing them as opposites is the crux of the problem. When we do that, we get into all kinds of trouble. And so the first section introduces kind of the evolution of compassion in the workplace. How have we seen and interacted with this concept over the last 20 or 30 years? And then COVID happened and it's fundamentally changed our understanding of compassion and what compassion looks like now. And that's where compassion accountability is the next evolution. It's the next generation of how we have to be in the workplace in order to thrive and to deal with where we are in our world. So then we talk about I introduce what is the compassion mindset. What does it really mean to make a choice to choose compassion. And we've identified a working definition of compassion that compassion is the practice of demonstrating that people are valuable, capable, and responsible. And this is a big definition, it's critical. And we spend a whole chapter identifying this that the practice of demonstrating compassion has to be a behavioral practice that we are working on every single day, like any other core competency. And the good news is compassion can be learned and can be taught. What are we practicing? We are demonstrating that people are valuable, capable, and responsible. Those are three critical components, and you can't have one without the other, or the pendulum will swing again to one end or the other of the spectrum. And we have to do this in every interaction because it's in the smallest moments that we make or break the relationships that create the culture that define the brand. So then next section, I introduce the big model, which is the three switches of the compassion mindset. And it's really the entire framework that organizations and leaders can use to choose their behaviors, evaluate their strategic decisions, and implement policy practices and procedures in their cultures that will truly treat people as valuable, capable, and responsible, and live out compassionate accountability in the culture.
Mm. Love that. Love everything you have to say. I'm curious, any thoughts around the barriers to someone implementing this or shifting their mindset towards a more compassionate mindset at work?
Yeah. Well, we've been working with this concept and trying to operationalize it in the workplace for 15 years. And so we've seen it all.
Yeah.
All of the barriers, all of the stereotypes, all of the preconceptions that people have about compassion. So the last section of the book is dedicated to overcoming barriers. And
Mm.
we've identified 5 critical misunderstandings that people have about compassion that create barriers. And then we share what is the reality? What do we really know about it? And then we invite them to, what if you looked at it this way?
Mm.
And so we give people a way to embrace and get on board with this concept because it's so critical and so necessary for leaders. No matter where you come from, no matter what your personality is, no matter what your upbringing or training is, it's still something we have to learn how to do.
Absolutely. I suppose I'm thinking of a concrete example, and
Yeah.
it's very telling that the organization I was in at the time, this was the behavior that was demonstrated. This was the attitude that they had. So there was someone at the time who was pregnant, and she had to take sick leave during her pregnancy. And I think in the end, she ended up taking sick leave until she had the baby. So it was maybe midway through, much, much earlier than you might expect. And the reaction, and I say the organization, but what I mean is the individuals in the organization was more so that this is going to mean more work for me. And less compassion, let's say, and more focus on what's in it for me, or the consequences of what's going to happen now is that I have to pick up all of this additional work because she's not able to carry it out.
Mhm, mhm.
So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts. As for me, it's a cultural shift that needs to happen to bring more compassion into to work. Any thoughts on that situation in particular?
Sure. Let's evaluate the situation from each of the 3 switches,
Mm.
because you can't just look at it from one perspective.
Okay.
Traditional notions of compassion would only focus on the switch of value. People are valuable. We have to care about them. We have to have empathy. We have to consider what they're going through. I mean, let's walk a mile in their shoes. So, in that sense, we would say this human is valuable. Therefore, they need that time off. We have to we should take up the slack. It's the right thing to do to care for that person. Well, however, what if we also treat ourselves as valuable, meaning we also now are experiencing the impact of this? So I'm feeling more stressed out. I'm feeling more anxious. Can we talk about that in a way that doesn't criticize anybody, doesn't undermine or blame anybody, simply to say, what if we could at the same time entertain the reality that I care about my colleague and I want to help her, and I feel more stressed out because this is a really bad time for me to take on extra work. And so I'm dealing with this as well.
Sure.
That's just one angle, but let's look at the capability switch.
Mm.
The fundamental assumption is all human beings are capable of being part of the solution under the right conditions.
Mm.
So this person, this woman who is taking necessary sick leave early, dealing with some unexpected issues, she should be part of the solution as well. She doesn't just get to walk away and have sick leave and then everybody else figures out what to do. She is still a dynamic, active part and an employee of the organization. So where does she get to be engaged in saying, how can you help us work on how this is going to go down? Um, Absolutely. If she has the benefits and she has the sick leave, she can take it technically. And at the same time, she is also responsible for her job. And so,
Mm.
why wouldn't we ask her to help us cover? Or maybe we could engage her about what are some ways that you might be able to do some work from home, or maybe there's some ways that you could continue to be involved and be part while still taking care of your body and of your
Mm.
baby.
Sure.
And then finally, the switch of responsibility. See, I think so often back to capability, we we so quickly take over all this responsibility and then we act like a martyr.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
we act like, "Oh, I can't believe she left us in the lurch." It's like, well, did you ever talk to her about did you engage her in this conversation? She's still part of the company. Um, that's not struggling with. And then the third switch of responsibility means no matter what happened before, I am 100% responsible for my thoughts, my feelings, and my behaviors going forward. So the real question is nobody caused us to feel bad. Nobody caused me to feel stressed. I get to choose what I'm going to do next. Instead of complaining about my employee who's taking sick leave, maybe I could set my own boundary and say, I'll take this much on, but not this much. And this is what I'm willing to do, but this is what I'm not willing to do. And ultimately, we have to keep the most important thing, which is the organization and the team are more important than the employee, any employee.
Mm.
And when we elevate that, we can realize we're here for a bigger purpose.
Sure,
And that gives people new energy, more perspective on the situation.
sure. Yeah,
Long answer to a scenario, but those three switches mean we
yeah.
really have to look at it from three different angles.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's loads to dive into from what you said.
Mm,
The first point being around this idea of being valuable, that's kind of the traditional, and that's maybe without that sense of accountability. That's it. Oh, let's just care for let's just care for our colleague, and that's all that matters.
right.
But we're bringing back into how do I care for myself without necessarily criticizing or blaming and creating that kind of better environment. And how do I care for myself when I'm more stressed? And
Mm,
then the capability part. So, and that's stepping up to be part of the solution. So we
mhm.
are capable people. How do we find a solution to this problem? By working
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
not by blaming. And then this idea then that in times of stress, when we decide to, like you say, play the martyr. I'm going to step in, I'm going to take all responsibility, and I'm going to be really stressed, and I'm going to tell everyone how stressed I am about this situation. But you haven't necessarily reached out to anyone else to share that load, to share that
Right.
responsibility.
Right.
Um, and then this, the third element then about responsibility. So personal responsibility for what is in our control, only the things that are in our
Yeah.
control, the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors, and setting really clear boundaries around that and maintaining. So
Yeah.
identifying what those boundaries are, communicating them, but sticking with them as well,
Mhm.
because it's so
Yeah.
easy. Well, it's hard, I think, to figure out what your boundaries are at times.
Right.
It's harder to communicate them, and then it's even harder to stick with them. You might, oh, just this once, I'll let that slide, but then it
Yeah.
becomes a habit. But I
Yes.
would also love to come back to this idea of the organization being the most important part. I just want to kind of pick that
Mhm.
apart a little bit because
Yeah.
if we're thinking of it from a selfish and personal perspective, we might think what matters most to me is myself and my own health. But I
Right.
totally understand where you're coming from, that from the organization's perspective, it's the sum of all of the different parts and
Yeah.
the total organization as a whole, that is
Mhm.
the most important thing. So do you want to kind of
Yeah, it's a
elaborate on both
great
of them,
I'm
please?
glad you brought that up because we also say people are our most important asset.
Mm,
And also we have to pay attention to the individual needs and wants and boundaries and
yeah.
values and flexibility or else people will leave. However, the way we reconcile that, a couple examples is one is that I really believe the role of a leader is to leverage diversity towards a shared goal. Leverage diversity towards a shared goal. Diversity represents the unique individuals in the organization with their own motivators, their own backgrounds, their own stories. And a leader finds a way to put that to work for the greater good so that the employee can be doing what they love, can be living their best life and making a difference in the organization. When those two are at odds, nobody's happy
Mm,
and everybody loses. So we have to do that. Another example might be a quote from my good friend Millie Ward. She's the president or CEO and founding owner of Stone Ward. It's an independent marketing agency, and she's gotten so many awards for best places to work and creativity. They live and die off their creativity. And her view on creativity is the best idea doesn't care who had it.
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
The best idea doesn't care who had it. So we also have to reinforce that we're going to treat you as special, but at the same time, this is not about your ego. It's about your growth, your contribution, you becoming a better person. And the true contribution is when the best idea wins, not your idea. And we can't really afford to have people around that are more invested in getting credit for their own ideas than they are about being part of a team that is accomplishing something amazing.
I love that. And it's so easy, I think. And the topic of power has come up a few times recently on the
Mhm.
podcast. And I think that
Yep.
it gets in the way sometimes when you get to that position where, and maybe we're all guilty of this. You have a greater sense of responsibility, and with that comes a greater sense of power. And you want to be shown, or you want to be seen as this
Yeah.
person who has the best ideas, and you're deserving of the
Yeah.
position that you've got yourself to. Um, and I think it's something that's maybe ingrained in us. It's one of the maybe downfalls of the leadership that has existed in the past. And I am
Yeah.
seeing this shift now.
Yeah.
And interestingly, just as I'm talking, another thing came to mind where sometimes people do this, they overwork to prove to themselves, it's not even to prove to other people, but it's to prove to themselves that they deserve the position that they're in,
Right.
that they may have
Right.
got a promotion. And
Yep.
it's kind of a signal, like I say, not necessarily externally, but just internally to themselves that I so deserve this position that I'm in. And
Yeah.
that's why I'm working so much towards it.
Can you imagine what would happen if they made the courageous choice to get vulnerable and talk to their peers and all of the people that are there to help them to tell the truth about how important it is for them that they succeed and what it means for them and what they're trying to accomplish in their career? And what if they asked for help? I have a couple stories in the book about leaders who when they finally have the courage to just talk about what they care about, they find out that people actually want them to succeed and want to help them, and instead of wanting to cut them down. And so it really becomes about owning my own value as a human being and showing that value by choosing to let people know what's important to me, what I care about, what I'm struggling with, and then asking for help, and stop struggling alone.
I love that idea of vulnerability. And again, it's something that is a little bit of a buzzword at the moment, you might say. But I think it's something that's here to stay. I think it's something that's really important. And it brings up to me the idea of psychological safety. So
Mhm.
especially in the workplace, where if we find
Yeah.
ourselves in a place where it doesn't feel safe to speak up, it
Mhm.
doesn't feel safe to
Mhm.
share that. Any thoughts
Right.
on creating that psychological safe environment
Yes.
so we can be more vulnerable at work?
Absolutely. And all three switches contribute to psychological safety. The switch of value, when it's turned on, we separate the person from the behavior and we can affirm people's experiences, their feelings, their perspectives as legitimate and valuable, independent of the behavior. And that's really, really critical. And so in the book, I share some really specific examples about when leaders cross the line and make it personal. In other words, they personalize conversations about behavior, and that creates a toxic, unsafe environment. In the capability situation, it's really we can create psychological safety when we include and invite people to be part of the solution. Now that can be challenging and risky though. So don't confuse discomfort with being unsafe. And a lot of people don't understand the difference. They're being asked to step up, asked to contribute, asked to put themselves out there. And they say, well, it's not safe. But what they're really saying is, I feel uncomfortable. This is scary, but it doesn't mean it's unsafe necessarily. And there's ways that you can check if that's true. From the responsibility scenario, if we don't walk the talk and if we create inconsistent, if we don't apply the standards consistently, then it's a minefield for people, and that's not safe either. Um, but I think one of the things that people may take issue with my book is I hold everyone equally accountable for psychological safety. There are great stories about people saying, "I don't feel safe," but what they're really doing is they're emotionally hijacking a situation because they don't wanna be held accountable. There's also situations where people choose not to speak up because of past experiences, but not because of anything actually in the moment. And all they have to do is claim their power to be respected. And again, I'm not trying to undermine toxic dynamics where people are repeatedly abused with power, but I'm also saying that we have to own what we can control. And if I'm in a meeting and the meeting dominator continually speaks over my friend who is an introvert, if I don't say anything, I am contributing to a psychologically unsafe environment. But if I say, excuse me just a second, my friend over here has a lot of great ideas and they're not getting a chance to share it. Will you please be quiet for a little bit to give her a chance to speak up?
Yeah.
Now that's creating psychological safety, and that's some scary stuff to do.
Mm.
But somebody has to have the courage to start treating everyone as equally valuable, capable, and responsible.
Yeah. Love that. There's a few things I'd love to unpack there. And that is the psychological safety and the difference between being uncomfortable versus being unsafe. Not something I ever thought about, but psychological safety feels uncomfortable. But that's
Mm.
not to say that it's unsafe to share what's
No,
going on for you, to share your
no,
responsibility, to share
yeah,
your vulnerability. And the other thing that I want to illustrate, you kind of alluded to it, that everyone is, well, you said, everyone is responsible for psychological safety. And I think oftentimes we think that it's the leaders who are responsible for it. And going back and kind of maybe elaborating on your point about being emotionally hijacking the situation by saying, I don't feel safe and therefore I can't share, we're kind of declaring our power to someone else, saying it's their
yeah,
responsibility to create a psychologically safe environment, when in fact it's
yeah,
actually collectively we're responsible for creating that environment.
yeah,
And I love the examples that you shared as well, that people can just have the opportunity to do that all the time.
all the
And
time.
it's not that it feels unsafe. It's just that it feels really hard and it's
Yeah,
scary to do that.
yeah,
And it takes a lot of courage to speak up and say, actually, I think it's time
yeah,
that you let Dave
yeah.
share what's going on for him.
It's so true, and it requires 2 things. To be able to speak up when I'm scared requires 2 things. First, I have to believe that I'm worth it. I have to believe that my feelings, my needs are as important as anyone else's, and they deserve equal airtime. So I have to choose that I'm okay first. Otherwise, why would I speak up if I don't believe that what I have to say is worth it? But here's the other thing. The fear of rejection, the fear of being shut down, the fear of not being taken seriously all comes from a belief that my value is dictated by how other people respond. So if I say I can't trust you until I'm sure you're not going to reject me, what I'm saying is you have the ability to make me valuable or not valuable.
Mm.
We need to cut that right off. I speak up because my needs matter. I don't speak up because I'm entitled to being treated great. I don't speak up because I know you're going to give me what I want. I speak up because I'm advocating for myself. And I know it's easier said than done, but when we can start realizing our value is not dependent on how other people respond, we can really start having a voice.
Oh, absolutely love that. And there was your choice of words there. I want to bring that back. So it's choosing
Mhm,
that. It's the fact that we have a choice in this
mhm.
situation and we choose to speak up even when we feel
Yeah,
uncomfortable. That we need to understand that just by being a human, that we are worth it and we
yeah,
do deserve to speak up
yeah,
and your needs are important. And this is a doozy, I think, the fear of rejection and shutting down actually becomes meaningless if you take
yeah,
that value away from that other
yeah,
person, saying it doesn't matter whether they reject me. It doesn't
yeah.
matter. I still have value because I'm a person and I
Yes.
have needs and I need to express those needs.
Let's say I speak up in a meeting, I share an idea and someone just ignores it. So I try again. And the person whom I'm really looking for approval this time says, yeah, yeah, whatever, but we already talked about that. So 2 times now, I've kind of been neglected. I could just shut down and say they don't care, they don't like me. Nobody cares what I have to say. It's not worth it. But then I'm choosing to play the role of the victim. And the real question is, what do I want? Well, I want to be heard and I want my idea to get a little bit of airtime in the group. I want to finish what I was trying to say. So my next move then is to say to that person, "Hey, um, I want to finish articulating my thought. Will you please wait till I'm done? And I really want you to hear the rest of this because it's important to me." Now I'm starting to ask for what I actually want instead of expecting it and assuming people are going to do it. And in meetings, when that happens in our team meetings, people change their behavior instantly. It's like, okay, I'm sorry. I'm listening.
I love that.
And then they will say, "Is there anything else you wanted to say?" Or, "Thanks for sharing that. Now we can have a real conversation about the idea." But I had to not quit on myself. And I had to also ask them to step up and be I had to hold them accountable for being a real teammate and really support me because that's what I need from them. But I
Yeah,
have to ask for it, and in a way, I have to demand it.
I love that. And again, your choice of words after what I actually want. So what I want is not just to kind of share my idea. What I want really is to be heard. I want to share the idea in its entirety, and I want to communicate it in a way that people would understand and
Yeah.
discuss the idea at greater length. And again, this goes back to this idea of my needs are important. What are my needs at work? This is something I talk about. It ties in quite strongly with the research I did as part of my dissertation and the work that I do with my clients is understanding what our needs are at work
Yes.
and satisfying those needs as a
Yes.
way to build happier at work or happier working environments. And I've also looked to come back to this idea of advocating for myself. So rather than playing victim, and the reason I wanted to pick up on that was I attended one of your webinars. It could be a year, could even be 18 months ago or so about the drama triangle. So if you want to share something about that and that's the kind of point on the
Yeah.
drama triangle and how that relates to everything that we're talking about.
Yeah. So the drama triangle is a elegant, a credible discovery by Dr. Stephen Cartman, a framework for how people misfunction and dysfunction when they're in distress. And we define drama as the misuse of conflict energy to struggle against ourselves or each other, to feel justified. I've come further to align now drama. There's 3 roles in the drama triangle. There's the victim role, which we've kinda talked about, putting myself last. The persecutor role, which just attack and blame everybody that doesn't give me what I want, and then the rescuer role, which we've kind of alluded to, where I go in and try to save everybody. And really those represent the 3 kinds of struggle that don't work. The victim struggles alone, the persecutor struggles against, turning anything into a win-lose, and the rescuer struggles instead of to be the hero and the savior and thinks that that boosts their ego. So these behaviors are really unhealthy kinds of struggle that are drama, and all they do is drain our energy and get us further away from our goals and less happy at work.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. But also bringing us away from compassion, like kind of bringing it full circle. This is exactly what you talked about at the start.
Yes.
It's not compassion. It's actually, it's either alone or against or, um, you know, all of that. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today? Any points that you'd like to get across before we wrap things up for the day?
Yeah, yes, thank you. We've talked a lot about interactions between people around different situations and dynamics. Leaders, listeners out there who are in a high level strategic leadership capacity, those are important things. And the things that keep them up at night is attracting and retaining talent, brand positioning, our reputation, the community. Are we meeting our strategic goals? How are we dealing with performance? And these are big strategic issues. And so I've dedicated a whole section of the book to implementation. And there are 6 kind of core strategic functions of an organization that could be greatly improved if we looked at them through the lens of compassion accountability. And so I want to say this is not just for us having a nice team meeting. This is also about how we design our performance initiatives and our recruitment initiatives, our change management, our whole change management processes can be done to keep our 3 switches on with compassion accountability.
Love that. And do you want to kind of elaborate on that? I'm interested in particular on the recruitment side
Yeah.
of things and also on the
Yeah.
performance management, just because those are
Yeah.
2 areas of pretty fair interest to me.
Well, 2 sides of recruitment. One is finding great talent, and the other one is keeping them.
Yeah.
And so finding great talent, what are you it depends how do you look for the right thing? And aside from the resume, we actually published a blog post I did called how to recruit h how to interview and recruit for the compassion mindset. Very specific behavioral interviewing questions for how do you find somebody that has their switches on already? But then the other side of the equation is, how do you get them and how do you get them to stay? And that has to do with the quality of your culture and the quality of your leadership. And so I share in my book a section about what are the new leadership competencies based on what do top performers really want? And how do leaders need to treat them to keep them? And interestingly, when you look at the literature, it breaks down equally into value, capability, and responsibility. So hire for it, lead for it, and people will
Mhm.
stay.
Yeah, I love that. And just wanted to pick up on the point around recruiting for compassion. Presumably, you're kind of maybe in the first instance looking for people who have that compassion mindset already, but also that it's something that you can teach to people if they don't
Oh
have it, if
yeah.
you recognize that they don't
Yeah.
have it, as they get onboarded in the organization, this is how we do
Yeah.
things around here. And maybe you worked previously in organizations where this wasn't, a top priority, but this is
Yeah.
how we do things around here.
Yeah, we've had several initiatives, one large one with the hospital system that a great team of people. And they just came through COVID. They were burned out. They were tired. They had spent 2.5 years in basically command and control, kind of like crisis intervention mode. They hadn't developed their culture. Everything was running on fumes. And so they needed to really develop their leadership skills for a post-COVID healthcare climate. We're also starting work now with a surgical a group of surgical clinics, and they're an amazing culture. And they all come there because they love people and they want to help, and they're having growing pains around size, and issues
Mm,
of accountability are really starting to come in. You can't just nice your way to a thriving culture when you have to pay attention to financials and
yes.
metrics and quality control and things you didn't really have to worry about when you were small.
Mm,
So
mm,
those are examples.
brilliant. Love it. And anything else that you'd like to share?
Well, Aoife, I think it goes even beyond organizations. Never before in our history of the world has the need for compassion and accountability been greater.
Mm,
Not only is it the key to thriving organizations during turbulent times, think about what's going on in politics, climate change,
yeah.
restorative justice, inclusion. These are big issues that are unfortunately dividing. We are getting divided around it when we really should be applying compassionate accountability, because I think these are the issues that will define our future and the ones that really, when we figure them out, we will thrive.
Mm, absolutely. Nate, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, what does being happier at work mean to you?
Well, it should probably be no surprise. This is the thing I ask myself every day now, and I would invite everyone else to ask them is, am I treating myself and other people as valuable? Am I treating myself and other people as capable? And am I treating myself and other people as responsible? And when I keep my switches on, it's a really good day.
I love that. I love that. Am I treating myself and other people? And then insert the switches there,
Yeah.
because then you are assuming correctly that other people are capable, other people are valuable, and other people are responsible as well.
Yes. And in the book, there are 3 questions related to this that you should put in every single customer service survey, every employee survey, every patient survey you ever do, and it will change the way you look at your work, and it will change the way your company runs.
Love it. Absolutely love the work that you're doing, Nate.
Thank you.
How can people connect with you? How can they get access to the book?
We're making it really easy. Compassionateaccountabilitybook.com. Everything
That
is there.
is easy. That's so easy. So
Yes.
compassionateaccountabilitybook.com, you'll find everything that you need. And if they want to connect with you personally, then as well.
You can find there.
Okay, brilliant.
Yep.
That's great. Thank you so much for another truly insightful conversation. Absolutely love chatting with you today. Thank you so much, Nate.
Aoife, you're welcome. And thanks for the difference you're making in the world.